Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to the segment of Code Gurbani's a-sabad-a-day. The rag is still the Nasri, but we have transitioned to Mahalla Pehla, the first Nanak. And this is in the form of an Ashtapadi, 8 stanzas, rather longish, a contrast from the previous adjacent sabads that we have been doing over the past few days. So we will recite this one stanza at a time, try and understand and reflect on the meaning, and proceed that way. The recitation. Dhanasari Mahalla Pehla Kar Duja Ashtapadiyan Ek Oankar Satgur Prasad Gur Sagar Ratani Bharpure Amrit Sant Chugeh Nahi Dure Har Ras Jog Chugeh Prabh Pave Sarvar Mein Hans Pran Pat Pave. The literal translation. Gur Sagar Ratani Bharpure. The Guru is the ocean, overflowing with jewels. Gur Sagar Ratani Bharpure. The seekers, the sants, the discerning mind, if you will, peck at the nectar within this ocean. It is not far away. Amrit Sant Chugeh Nahi Dure. And since the word pecking, which means they're selective, they peck at the feed of divine essence. Har ras jog chugeh. And within this lake, the swan finds the source of life. Sarvar mein hans pran pat pave. So the Guru is being framed as a vast ecological system of consciousness. Sagar. This is Oankar, is a system of consciousness. It is not a stagnant pond, but a reservoir of jewels. And so the jewels that are being mentioned is a metaphor for virtues and values, qualities. And Hans Pranapatapame, the swan mind, represents a mind that is discerning, that has developed the discernment to filter nectar from, meaning milk from water, is the analogy. So to peck at the essence implies a sustained granular engagement with wisdom. And the divine is not remote. It is in the very environment in which the swan swims. So in the very environment that we are in lie all of these jewels in the form of virtues and qualities, but we have to cultivate a discerning mind in order to peck at what is real and what isn't. And then the Guru transitions to the Rahau, where he's speaking about the opposite mindset, which is the default mindset, us in an egoic state. He says, what can the poor crane achieve by bathing in a muddy puddle? Kya bag bapura chapadi nae. So bag bapura, the crane, represents the degraded mind, the egoic mind, and it is sunk in its own mud. So kya bag bapura chapadi nae. Kichad dube mel na jaye. It only sinks further and further into the mud of its own ego, and its filth is not removed. So this is essentially our default state, a failed psychological strategy, if you will. So as I said, the puddle, chapadi, is that shallow, a chapadi is a shallow closed loop system, even physically. And that is what the ego is. And the mind and the crane is fixated on surface level rituals, or the crane, as you know, predatory self-interest. So that's what's going on. That is where we are. in our current state. We have to develop discernment. Rakh rakh taran tare vichari, dubda chod bhay narankari, मुक्त पदार्थ हर रस चाखे, आवन जान रहे गुर राखे, रख रख चरण तरे विचारी. How to develop discernment by becoming a reflective thinker. Rakh rakh karan kare vichari, to think. How? With care. Rakh rakh, meaning placing your feet with care. The feet of your thought, that is. Rakh rakh charan vichari, dubda chod. Shed duality, the notion that you are a separate self. So shedding that, they begin to realize, they become one with the formless, meaning you begin to identify your source as that formless self from where all life, all form emanates. And now, tasting that divine essence, mukta padarth har ras chakhe, this is the nectar, the wisdom, if you will, the shabad, and avan jaan rahe gur rakhe, they obtain liberation, and the cycles of coming and going, meaning birthing and dying of this thought process that includes death in it, is they're relieved of that. Careful steps is the key here. Rakh rakh charan kare vichari, mindfulness and intentionality in action. That is the core psychological shift that you have to bring about in moving from dubida, remember, duality or cognitive dissonance, to nirankari, alignment with hukam. So it is a substance, a padarth. Liberation is not something abstract, but it is experienced through the senses of the soul. And then now he comes back to the Sarvar Hansa, the swan in the lake. He says the swan does not really leave the lake. Sarvar Hansa chhod na jai. Through loving devotion, it merges into an intuitive, spontaneous poise. Sahaj samai. Now the swan is in the lake is in the swan. Sarvar mein hans, hans mein sagar. And through the Guru's word, one honors the unspeakable speech. Akatha katha gur bachan adar. This is our consciousness is like a drop in the ocean, and the ocean's chemistry is in the drop. Similarly, the seeker's mind becomes a mirror in the Guru's vastness and comes into a state of equilibrium, sahaj, where the effort of swimming against the grain disappears into a state of just being. So, in the next verse, the Guru says, Sun mandal ik jogi baise. In the sphere of silence sits a yogi, neither male nor female. How can anyone describe them? Nar na purkh, kahan ko kaise? And Tribhavan Jot rahe levelai, Surnar Nath Sache Sarnai. They remain focused on the light of the three worlds, on the wisdom of the heart. Now, this Sun Mandal is essentially, you might think of it as the 0 point field of the mind. This is actually a deconstruction of our identity altogether. That through this process, through this deep meditative state, socialized identities, including gender, dissolve. one transcends the binary to apprehend a universal energy, Jyot. So when you reach that point, even gender identity disappears. And in the 5th verse, Anand mool anath adhari gurmukh pagat sehaj bichari pagat vachal bhai katan hare haume maar mile pag thare. The ego has been subdued here. Haume maar mile pag thare. You find stability. You find the source of bliss, Ananda Mool Anand Adhari. It becomes your support. So Anand, bliss, is your foundational ground. It is not a fleeting emotion. So cutting a fear is, in a sense, biological, psychological release. Moving out of this survival mode, fight or flight, fear, into a state of rest and digest, sehaj. But the Guru goes on to say, despite many efforts, death continues to torment us. Anik jatan kar kaal santai. But he says we come into this world with death preordained. Maran likhaye mandal meh aaye. And because the fear of death overpowers us, the precious jewel of life is lost in duality. Janam padarth dubida khove. Aap na chinas parama rove. You do not recognize the self, your true self, and you spend this life wandering in doubt. This is the tragedy of our lives, which remain unexamined. Apanachinas, not knowing the self, is the root of all psychological suffering. Dubida, duality, is the leak, so to speak, in our mental energy, causing us to waste the substance of our lifespan. Janam padarth, we are wasting that substance. The next verse is Kehto, Padto, Sunto, Ek, Dheeraj, Dharma, Dharani, Dhar, Tek, Jat, Sat, Sanjam, Hriday, Samaye, Chauthe, Pad ko, Je, Man, Pahpati, Aaye. We need to transcend the ego and its states to what is called Chautha Pad, the 4th state, which is the integration of consciousness beyond waking, dreaming, and sleeping. These are the 3 states that are typically identified. When the mind comes into or believes patyaya in this state, now you see, then sanjam, hriday samay, then that is what happens. All of these things that we do, kehto, padto, sunto, ek, speaking, reading, listening, all of these practices, he says, are one. Dheeraj dharma dharani dhartek jat sat sanjam hriday samay. When we reach that state, the Chautha Pad, all of this is not a forced struggle, but a natural, heart-centered expression. Sache nirmal mailana lagge. So when in that state, we are actually touching the true one, and that is purity. No filth attaches to it. Gur ke sabad, through the Guru's word, parama pau pagge, doubt, duality, and fear of death just dissolve. Pagge, they run away. Surat murat adi anup, the consciousness that we then flip into, Ad Anup, is unique, it's beautiful, it's incomparable. Nanak Sache, Sach Sarup, that is the true form. That formless is the true form. So the remedy for the Bharpure, that muddy puddle that we referred to in the Rahau, is the Sabad, the Guru's word, which acts, if you will, as a vibration, because words vibrate, and they scatter aside the dense patterns of doubt and fear in the mind. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.